Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born in Hartford, Connecticut, to Frederick Beecher Perkins and Mary Fitch Westcott Perkins. She had one brother, Thomas Adie, who was 14 months older than her. Her father was an American editor, writer, and librarian, and part of the distinguished New England Beecher clan. These were descendants of John Beecher and known for their political activism on issues such as abolitionism, temperance, and women's rights. However, her father abandoned the family when Charlotte was very young, and her mother moved often with her children from relative to relative, and they lived mostly in poverty. Gilman's intelligence and breadth of knowledge always impressed her teachers, who were nonetheless disappointed in her because she was a poor student. Her favorite subject was natural philosophy, especially what later would become known as physics. Gilman came from a long line of activists and public speakers. Her great-grandfather on her father's side was Dr. Lyman Beecher, the renowned Calvinist preacher, and her great-aunts were Harriet Beecher Stowe, the noted novelist, Catherine Beecher, an advocate of higher education for women, and Isabella Beecher Hooker, a leader in the demand for equal suffrage. Since their mother was unable to support the family on her own, her family was often in the presence of her aunts, where she likely developed her passion for writing and activism. Gilman spent much of her youth in Providence, Rhode Island, and while she had very little formal education, she attended the Rhode Island School of Design for 2 years from 1878 to 1880. She supported herself there as an artist, designing greeting cards, and at one point she supported herself by selling soap door to door. She was also a tutor and a painter and encouraged others to expand their artistic creativity. During her time at the Rhode Island School of Design, Gilman met Martha Luther in about 1879. The two were believed to be in a romantic relationship, although both eventually married men, given the restrictions of the time period. Letters between the two women chronicled their lives from 1883 to 1889 and contains over 50 letters, including correspondence, illustrations, and manuscripts. They pursued their relationship until Luther called it off in order to marry a man in 1881. Gilman was devastated and detested romance and love until she met her first husband. In 1884, at the age of 24, Gilman married aspiring artist Charles Walter Stetson, after initially declining his proposal. The following year, she bore their only child, Catherine Beecher Stetson, and soon after birth, Gilman suffered from a serious bout of what today would be diagnosed as postpartum depression. While she had often been melancholy growing up, motherhood and married life pushed Gilman to the edge. She sought treatment with Dr. Silas Ware Mitchell of Philadelphia, and in 1887 took the controversial rest cure, which was a treatment that included extensive bed rest that he had pioneered. She responded well to the treatment and after a month was sent home with a prescription to live as domestically as possible, keep her child with her at all times, lie down for 1 hour after each meal, and to never touch a pen, brush, or pencil for the rest of her life. Her depression returned, and soon after coming home, Gilman separated from her husband of 4 years, and such a separation was a rare event in the 19th century. After their separation in 1888 and their divorce in 1894, Gilman moved with her daughter to Pasadena, California, where she began her professional life writing plays and poetry, as well as fiction and nonfiction works, some of which were published in progressive magazines. She became active in organizing social reform movements, and as a delegate, she represented California in 1896 at both the National American Women's Suffrage Association Convention in Washington, D.C., and the International Socialist and Labor Congress in London. In 1890, she was introduced to Nationalist Club's movement, which worked to end capitalism's greed and distinctions between classes while promoting a peaceful, ethical, and truly progressive human race. Published in the Nationalist magazine, her poem Similar Cases was a satirical review of people who resisted social change. Throughout the same year, 1890, she became inspired enough to write 15 essays, poems, a novella, and the semi-autobiographical short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Her career was launched when she began lecturing on nationalism and gained the public's eye with her first volume of poetry, In This Our World, published in 1893. As a successful lecturer who relied on giving speeches as a source of income, her fame grew along with her social circle of similar-minded activists and writers of the feminist movement. In 1900, Gilman married her first cousin, George Houghton Gilman, and over the next 25 years, she wrote and published more than a dozen books and ran her own magazine, The Forerunner, in which many of her stories appeared. When George died suddenly in 1934, Gilman returned to California to be near her daughter. Just 2 years earlier, in 1932, Gilman had discovered that she had an inoperable breast cancer. Gilman was an advocate of euthanasia for the terminally ill, and she died by suicide on August 17, 1935, by taking an overdose of chloroform. In both her autobiography and suicide note, she wrote that she chose chloroform over cancer, and she died quickly and quietly. In 1892, Gilman published her now famous semi-autobiographical story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Loosely based on the rest cure that she received under Dr. Mitchell's medical supervision, the story depicts a woman sent to rest in the bedroom of a rented summer home. This story was inspired by her treatment from her first husband. The narrator in the story must do as her husband, who is also the doctor, demands, although the treatment he prescribes contrasts directly with what she actually needs: mental stimulation and the freedom to escape the monotony of the room to which she's confined. The narrator's husband, a physician, does not believe she is really ill and describes her malady as hysterical tendencies. The woman, however, descends into madness. While the story received mixed reviews, Gilman contended that her purpose in writing it was to reach Dr. Mitchell and show him the failure of his treatments. She sent him a copy, but never received a response. Since its original printing, it has become anthologized in numerous collections of women's literature, American literature, and textbooks, though not always in its original form. For instance, many textbooks omit the phrase "in marriage" from a very important line in the beginning of the story. John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. The reason for this omission is a mystery, as Gilman's views on marriage are made clear throughout the story. Gilman called herself a humanist and believed the domestic environment oppressed women through the patriarchal beliefs upheld by society. She embraced the theory of reform Darwinism and argued that Darwin's theories of evolution presented only the male as the given in the process of human evolution, overlooking the origins of the female brain in society that rationally chose the best suited mate that they could find. Gilman argued that male aggressiveness and maternal roles for women were artificial and no longer necessary for survival in post-prehistoric times. She wrote, "There is no female mind. The brain is not an organ of sex. We might as well speak of a female liver." She was a spokesperson on topics such as women's perspective on work, dress reform, and family. Housework, she argued, should be equally shared by men and women, and that at an early age women should be encouraged to be independent. In many of her major works, Gilman advocated women working outside of the home, and in 1903 she wrote one of her most critically acclaimed books, The Home, Its Work and Influence, which proposed that women are oppressed in their home and that the environment in which they live needs to be modified in order to be healthy for their mental states. Gilman argued that the home should be socially refined. The home should shift from being an economic entity, where a married couple live together because of the economic benefit or necessity, to a place where groups of men and groups of women can share in a peaceful and permanent expression of personal life. Gilman's main argument was that sex and domestic economies went hand in hand. For a woman to survive, she was reliant on her sexual assets to please her husband so that he would financially support his family. From childhood, young girls are forced into a social constraint that prepares them for motherhood by the toys that are marketed to them and the clothes designed for them. She argued that there should be no difference in the clothes that little girls and little boys wear, the toys they play with, or the activities they do, and described tomboys as perfect humans who ran around and used their bodies freely and healthily. Gilman didn't deny that biological differences exist between men and women. Like many social Darwinists, she was fascinated by the animal world, and she used animal analogies to explain the human condition as well as biological and behavioral differences between the sexes. However, she maintained that from the earliest age, young girls were encouraged, if not forced, to act, think, look, and talk differently from boys, though their interests and capabilities at that age might be identical. She also argued that women and men in general have different biological principles to which they adhere. She maintained that women's unique capabilities, particularly their love and concern for others, have tremendous social value, though they are grossly underappreciated. Gilman argued that women's contributions to civilization throughout history have been halted because of an androcentric culture. She believed that womankind was the underdeveloped half of humanity, and improvement was necessary to prevent the deterioration of the human race. Gilman believed economic independence was the only thing that could really bring freedom for women and make them equal to men. Women and Economics was Gilman's most sociological and theoretical work of nonfiction, and still outlines many of the issues that contemporary sociologists of work identify today. Gilman argued that if women were actually compensated for their work in the home and not given the status of their husband, poor women with many children would earn the most money because they do the most work. However, the fact is that poor women do the most amount of work and receive the least amount of money. They work long hours cleaning, cooking, and raising children. Meanwhile, rich women do the least amount of work and have the most money to spend because they have domestic help, servants, and nannies who perform the household and child-rearing labor for them. For those who argue that a woman's place is in the home because of her childbearing responsibilities, Gilman argues that women's work is actually mostly house service, such as cooking, cleaning, mending, etc., not child service, such as bearing children or breastfeeding. So, Gilman contends that the traditional division of labor is not biologically driven. When the sexual economic relationship ceases to exist, life on the domestic front would certainly improve, as frustration in relationships often stems from the lack of social contact that the domestic wife has with the outside world. Gilman also compares the traditional position of the woman to the domesticated horse. Neither the horse nor the woman is free. She says, the horse, in his free natural condition, is economically independent. He gets his living by his own exertions, irrespective of any other creature. The horse, in his present condition of slavery, is economically dependent. He gets his living at the hands of his master, and his exertions, though strenuous, bear no direct relation to his living. The horse works, it is true, but what he gets to eat depends on the power and will of his master. His living comes through another. He is economically dependent. Like a horse, women are subject to the power and will of another, because their domestic labor, for which no wages are received in return, belongs not to themselves, but to their husbands. Women are therefore rendered economically dependent. Rather than develop their own capabilities, women reduce themselves to attracting a viable life partner. Economically, this makes sense for women, because their profit comes through the power of sex attraction, not through their own talents. The problem with women's economic dependence on men is that their energies are focused on catching a man rather than on being productive citizens. Gilman saw it as a tragic waste that women were forced to spend their time and energy on grooming and finding a man, rather than on intellectual concerns. In denying her capabilities, she reduces herself to being, literally, the weaker sex. The sociobiological tragedy that Gilman perceives is that women are not underdeveloped men, but the feminine half of humanity in undeveloped form. She argues that women are oversexed, that there is too much emphasis on their sex distinction, rather than a healthy survival of the fittest, in which women would be taught to be strong and productive. Bourgeois women are mandated to be soft and weak, dependent, emotional, and frail. Gilman believed that having a comfortable and healthy lifestyle should not be restricted to married couples. All humans need a home that provides these amenities. Gilman suggested that a communal type of housing, open to both males and females, consisting of rooms of suites and houses, should be constructed. This would allow individuals to live singly and still have companionship and the comforts of a home. Both males and females would be totally economically independent in these living arrangements, allowing for marriage to occur without either the male or the female's economic status having to change. The structural arrangement of the home is also redefined by Gilman. She removes the kitchen from the home, leaving rooms to be arranged and extended in any form and freeing women from the provision of meals in the home. The home would become a true personal expression of the individual living in it. Ultimately, the restructuring of the home and manner of living will allow individuals, especially women, to become an integral part of the social structure, in close, direct, permanent contact with the needs and uses of society. That would be a dramatic change for women, who generally considered themselves restricted by family life built upon their economic dependence on men. Gilman has been criticized by some for her racist beliefs and remarks, although to many she is still hailed as a trailblazer and icon of early feminism. drawing not only on social Darwinist theories of survival of the fittest, but also on the common sense notions of manifest destiny and the white man's burden dominant in her day. Gilman made patently racist remarks. In her discussion of the isolation of traditional housewives, Gilman fails to recognize that African American women were often required to work and had traditions of support and community that white women did not. Furthermore, paid work is a valued dimension of Black motherhood, as Patricia Hill Collins points out in her article, The Meaning of Motherhood in Black Culture and Black Mother-Daughter Relationships. With regard to African Americans, Gilman wrote in the American Journal of Sociology, "We have to consider the unavoidable presence of a large body of aliens, of a race widely dissimilar and in many respects inferior, whose present status is to us a social injury." Gilman further suggested that the problem is this: given in the same country, race A progressed in social evolution, say to status 10, and race B progressed in social evolution, say to status 4. Given that race B in its present condition does not develop fast enough to suit race A, how can race A best and most quickly promote the development of race B? Gilman's solution was that all Black people beneath a certain grade of citizenship, those who were not decent, self-supporting, and progressive, should be taken hold of by the state. This proposed system, which Gilman called enlistment rather than enslavement, would require the enforced labor of Black Americans, men, women, and children. Gilman believed that those enlisted should receive a wage, but only after the cost of the labor program was met. Gilman also believed that old stock Americans of British colonial descent were giving up their country to immigrants who, she said, were diluting the nation's reproductive purity. When asked about her stance on the matter during a trip to London, she famously replied, "I am an Anglo-Saxon before everything." However, in an effort to gain votes for all women, she spoke out against the literacy requirements for the right to vote at the National American Women's Suffrage Association Convention, which took place in 1903 in New Orleans. Gilman has also been highly criticized because she tended to assert a natural superiority of the female sex. She was highly criticized for her depiction of women as saintly givers and men as warring beasts, for when she glorifies such quote-unquote inherent differences, her radical feminist theory dissolves into a sentimental worship of the status quo.